The United States Coast Guard seized the vessel out in international waters.
Brian Hooker claimed his wife vanished into the pitch-black Bahamian waters during a tragic accident.
But the sailboat Soulmate is now wrapped tightly in yellow federal crime scene tape. What federal agents are hauling out of that hull tells a completely different story.
They discovered something below deck that completely shatters his established timeline.
And investigators seized it just as the husband tried to quietly flee the jurisdiction. The official media story of this disappearance is wildly incomplete. To follow every twist and turn in this investigation as they unfold, hit subscribe now because this active mystery is developing fast. The official timeline of April 4th begins with a disappearance that completely defies basic maritime logic. Lynette Hooker vanished, and the sole witness to her final moments was her own husband. Going by the initial story laid out by Brian Hooker, the married couple spent hours drinking before boarding a small 8-foot dinghy. He claimed they were trying to navigate from the shore back to their main yacht, their 46-foot sailing sloop, when tragedy suddenly struck. He described brutal weather conditions, 18-mile-per-hour winds, and 3-foot waves. He claimed the rough water ripped a wooden oar straight out of his hand. He testified that Lynette was thrown violently into the dark ocean, that he tossed her a life ring and eventually lost sight of her in the pitch black.
From there, his timeline suggests he drifted alone in that tiny boat for roughly 8 hours before washing ashore on the eastern edge of Marsh Harbor around 4 on Easter morning.
But official weather logs from that exact night flatly contradict the core of his survival story. National Weather Service records show a different reality.
There were absolutely no high winds in that specific Bahamian zone.
There were no 3-foot swells whatsoever. The severe ocean conditions that allegedly caused her death simply never happened, leaving investigators with the single biggest question of the whole case.
If the sea was calm and his boat was working,
why didn't he jump in to pull his wife to safety?
But the evidence everyone was looking at wasn't the real issue. The bizarre actions he took after her disappearance instantly raised red flags for local investigators. When searchers finally tracked down Brian Hooker in Marsh Harbor, he spun a frantic tale about his desperate hunt for rescue. He said he struggled through sharp, thick brush to reach the nearest town. He claimed he banged on the doors of 2 different homes but found nobody inside. He alleged he managed to wave down a passing car, pleading for help with his missing wife. But the drivers simply sped away. But his actual physical condition told a completely different story. When the rescue crew found him, he was wearing clean blue slides.
Walking through that rough wilderness in flimsy sandals should have torn his feet apart, but they were fine.
Then came the interrogation. In a tense Bahamian police interrogation, investigators threw roughly 94 detailed questions at him about that fateful night. He answered exactly 4 of them. He slipped right through the local court system and went free. He quickly launched into a series of calculated interviews with major news networks,
Passionately insisting that he would never leave the Bahamas without his wife.
He claimed it would take a higher power to make him stop searching. But that was not the reality. Within 24 hours of walking out of jail, he secured an emergency passport. He fled back to the United States. He abandoned the active search area. Worse, he left his sailboat Soulmate moored in the Bahamas. For someone whose wife was missing at sea, that vessel was his best tool for finding her. It had high-tech navigation, radio arrays, and deep water capability. Yet, he walked away. Instead of steering it himself to search the islands, he hired a captain and mate to sail the boat back to the American mainland. Why walk away from the best tool to find her? While he flew back to America, supposedly to visit relatives in Michigan and California, Lynette's mother, Darlene, and her daughter, Carly Ellsworth, got nothing but silence. For over 5 weeks, the husband who blamed a tragic accident for his wife's disappearance never contacted her grieving family. No comfort, no shared grief.
He figured he was safe from the jurisdiction of the Bahamas.
He believed his boat was safely heading back to him. But the United States Coast Guard tracked that delivery crew every single mile of the trip.
They were waiting out there with federal warrants.
When federal agents stopped the sailboat, they did not perform a routine safety check. This was a targeted seizure. They seized the boat in open water,
Took it from the hired crew, and towed it straight to the Fort Pierce Coast Guard station.
Investigators spent hours below deck, bagging forensic evidence and locking down the chain of custody.
but that physical trace evidence,
The fibers and biological markers might actually be the least important clues on board.
people view modern sailboats as simply canvas and fiberglass. They are really floating digital fortresses. And the computer systems on board the Soulmate tracked every single move made that night. Do you believe the digital data logged on the Soulmate proves she ever came back? Or is there another explanation for the water and power used that night? If the upcoming court filing changes what we know, you will definitely want to be here. The Coast Guard investigators use a level of forensic science that suspects almost never expect. They do not just look at the physical ship. They are rebuilding the vessel's entire digital memory. A modern 46-foot sailboat is packed with sensitive sensors.
Each time a water pump turns on to run a shower, the computer logs the exact second.
When a cabin light is flipped on, the system records the power drain. If someone opens the fridge, or if the bilge pump starts up,
Or if they drop the heavy anchor, the ship's computer leaves a permanent digital footprint.
Brian Hooker's official timeline relies on just one claim.
He and Lynette pushed off from their sailboat, the Soulmate, in that small dinghy. Neither would ever return.
If digital forensics show the onboard freshwater pump was activated, after the dinghy supposedly drifted away, his entire story collapses. If those cabin lights were switched on when the boat was supposedly empty, this ocean tragedy starts looking like a staged crime. Detectives are also pulling the GPS telemetry, the chart plotter history, and the AIS tracking data. If the sailboat left its anchorage, stopped at another location, and then returned, the onboard satellite tracking will reveal the exact coordinates. Then we have the troubling issue of the distress signals. Brian insisted he fired 2 emergency flares from the drifting dinghy, trying to flag down any passing vessels in the dark. However, unofficial leaks from the police investigation suggest only a single flare was ever discharged. The second flare apparently remained loaded inside the emergency gun.
Every single claim he made to those first responder rescue teams is now being cross-checked against hard data.
When he first guided the emergency rescue personnel, he claimed Lynette was wearing nothing but a black 2-piece swimsuit. He never mentioned the royal blue headscarf she wore, or the distinct aquamarine beach cover-up she had with her.
He also failed to mention her black fanny pack and the exact color of her dry bag.
His incomplete information sent search and rescue teams on a flawed, useless path.
And when rescue coordinators handed him the exact contact details
To hire a private vessel and join the search, they never heard from him again. The contradictions were piling up. But federal agents at the Fort Pierce Coast Guard base were hunting for one critical clue that tied the victim to the main boat.
they were searching for a specific electronic device that Lynette Hooker wore on her wrist daily.
Security footage from the Abaco Inn captured the couple standing by the pool.
At exactly 6:34 p.m. on the very night she vanished.
In those video frames, Lynette Hooker is clearly wearing her Apple Watch. Since that specific watch model had a terrible battery life,
Her family knew she had a strict routine of taking it off around dinner time to put it on its charger.
Brian's official story insists that she fell from the dinghy into the ocean, still wearing the clothes she had on when they left the beach. They supposedly never reached the main sailboat again.
Yet, when federal agents served a search warrant on the seized sailboat,
They found her Apple Watch sitting right where it belonged, on board the sailboat, Soulmate.
And that single piece of digital evidence changes this.
From a simple search mission into a homicide investigation. If her Apple Watch was found on that boat, the implications are absolute. It proves she survived that dinghy ride. It proves she made it back to the cabin.
It means his entire story of the violent waves,
The lost oar and that fatal fall into the dark water was completely fabricated. This shocking discovery forces investigators to look backward into the victim's history and their troubled marriage. And that history contains some major red flags.
relatives have since revealed a documented pattern of domestic abuse. Serious allegations point to a prior incident where Brian Hooker allegedly tried to choke his wife. When you piece together a volatile domestic history,
With a sudden vanishing and a fake timeline, investigators zero in on a suspect.
investigators are systematically tearing apart the couple's complex financial architecture.
They are auditing life insurance policies, joint bank accounts, and shared assets. A 46-foot sailing sloop requires serious cash just to maintain. Slip fees, specialized marine insurance, and fuel create a relentless cash drain. If there was talk of an impending divorce or crushing debt, the motive takes shape fast. Federal investigators never rush these kinds of complex cases.
They do not just cuff a suspect to buy time while building their case.
They build the complete foundation for a prosecution first.
When the feds finally move, their conviction rate typically exceeds 95%.
Right now, Brian Hooker remains a free man with no official murder charges filed against him. But he has completely lost control of both the story and the evidence. The very vessel that served as his home is now a sterile crime lab for forensic data extraction. Every false statement made to reporters, every contradiction fed to the Bahamian police, and everything hidden from the rescue teams is now locked in the public record. Sure, you can hire a crew to sail a boat across international borders. But you can never erase the digital memory of a boat that knows exactly what went down in the dark. If you are following this mystery closely, the next development is something you cannot miss. Whether the digital logs from the sailboat named Soulmate have proven exactly where the boat was anchored at 4 a.m. that morning and who was at the helm is a question the Coast Guard Investigative Service is still keeping tightly under wraps.